The last whisper of a wine glass clinking against crystal finally faded into the sophisticated hum of the gilded spoon. Serafina Sarah Dubois, her movements fluid and practiced, efficiently cleared the remnants of a dessert course from table 7. At 28, Sarah possessed a quiet elegance, her dark braided hair neatly coiled, and deep-set eyes that held a subtle, persistent melancholy, a shadow no amount of ambient candlelight could fully mask. She was a waitress, impeccably dressed in the restaurant's crisp white apron and black uniform, blending seamlessly into the opulent backdrop of glittering chandeliers and polished mahogany. Yet, beneath the veneer of her professional efficiency, her mind was a vibrant symphony, alive with intricate melodies and harmonies that only she could hear. She moved with an almost ethereal detachment, her hands gliding over the polished tabletop as if caressing unseen piano keys, her fingers twitching with a forgotten rhythm. The Gilded Spoon was a world of hushed conversations and extravagant tastes, a stark contrast to the small, sparsely furnished apartment Sarah returned to each night. Here, the soft clatter of silverware and the low murmur of discerning patrons were her soundtrack, but in her soul, a grand concerto yearned to break free. Once, she had been a piano prodigy, a name whispered with awe in esteemed musical circles. An invitation to a prestigious European conservatory had arrived, a golden ticket to a future paved with black and white keys. But fate, in its cruel indifference, had intervened. A sudden, devastating family illness had shattered her dreams, forcing her to trade concert halls for serving trays, sacrificing her passion for the stark realities of survival. The grand piano that now dominated her tiny living room was a ghost of that past, a beloved relic inherited from her late mother. Its polished surface reflected not just her face, but the silent, unplayed music trapped within her. It was her sanctuary, her confessional, the only place where the constant push and pull between resignation and the ghost of her ambition could find a fleeting release. Sarah rarely spoke of her past, preferring to remain an enigma to her colleagues and customers. Her internal conflict was a private battle, fought in the quiet hours after her shifts. On one hand, there was the acceptance of her current reality, the pragmatic understanding that her family needed her steady income. On the other, there was the persistent ache of what might have been, a haunting melody of unfulfilled potential that echoed in the silence of her heart. She often found herself staring at the piano, her fingers hovering above the keys, a silent war waging within her. "Play," a voice would urge. "Feel the music again." But another, more insistent voice would retort, "What's the point? It's over. You have responsibilities." This internal tug-of-war left her perpetually weary, a deep-seated fatigue that no amount of sleep could truly alleviate. Her compassion, however, was a quiet, unwavering force that transcended her own struggles. Sarah consistently picked up extra shifts, stretching her meager earnings and meticulously setting aside a small portion of her tips. This hidden fund was her lifeline, channeled directly back to her rural hometown, to her aunt and uncle who tirelessly cared for her younger cousin, afflicted with a chronic, debilitating illness. Sarah's small contributions provided the vital medicine and specialized care her cousin desperately needed, a quiet act of love that few knew about. She'd often forego a hot meal for herself, opting instead for a simple sandwich, just to ensure that extra $10 could be sent home. Her family, humble and hardworking, never asked for much, but Sarah felt an immense, almost crushing responsibility to provide for them. She carried their burdens alongside her own, a silent atlas of familial duty. Beyond her family, her empathy extended to the forgotten souls on the city streets. At the end of particularly long shifts, when the kitchen had closed and the last patrons had departed, Sarah would discreetly collect any untouched bread rolls or leftover portions of the staff meal. She never sought recognition for these gestures. One bitterly cold evening, as snowflakes began to dust the cobbled alleyways behind the restaurant, she spotted an elderly, shivering man huddled in the doorway of a closed shop. His threadbare coat offered little protection against the biting wind. Without a word, Sarah knelt beside him, pressing a warm, wrapped sandwich into his trembling hand. Their eyes met, a shared understanding passing between them, a silent acknowledgement of life's quiet struggles, and the small, vital acts of human kindness. He offered a slight, grateful nod, his eyes welling with unshed tears, and Sarah, her heart warmed by the gesture, continued on her way, a ghost in the urban night, leaving behind a subtle trace of hope. She knew what it felt like to be cold, to be hungry, to be overlooked. These small acts of defiance against the harshness of the world were her silent prayers, her way of ensuring a little bit of light found its way into the darkness. As she moved between tables, her mind often drifted, composing silent symphonies. Tonight, a jazz trio played softly in the lounge area, their improvisations weaving through the dining room. The pianist, a young man with nimble fingers, launched into a particularly complex improvised solo. As Sarah passed, her thumb, almost imperceptibly, tapped a complex, syncopated rhythm against the edge of her serving tray, a beat far too intricate for idle fidgeting, a subtle betraying of a deeper, innate musicality. The rhythm was precisely that of a challenging passage from a Chopin nocturne, a piece only a trained pianist would recognize, let alone internalize so perfectly. Her eyes, usually downcast, flickered briefly towards the lounge, a wistful yearning clouding them before she quickly averted her gaze, pulling herself back to the mundane reality of her duties. Later, as she meticulously polished the crystal wine glasses, preparing them for the next day's service, her gaze fell upon her right index finger. A faint, almost invisible callus marred its tip, a small, hardened testament to countless hours spent pressing against the ivory keys of her piano, a ghost of her forgotten virtuosity. It was a mark she rarely noticed, yet it was a constant physical reminder of the years of relentless practice, the discipline and the profound connection she once shared with her instrument. The callus, though small, was dense and unyielding, a clear indication of thousands upon thousands of repetitions, each note hammered into muscle memory. It was the mark of a concert pianist, not a waitress. She would occasionally trace its outline with her left thumb, a brief, private moment of remembrance for the life she had once envisioned. The restaurant slowly emptied, the last of the glittering patrons departing into the chill night. Sarah finished her duties, the quiet of the empty dining room amplifying the melancholic strains of a classical piano concerto playing softly on the kitchen radio. It was a Chopin nocturne, a piece her mother had adored, a melody filled with both profound beauty and heart-wrenching sadness. Unbidden, a single tear traced a path down Sarah's cheek, catching the faint glow from the service counter. She quickly, almost angrily, wiped it away, her face hardening into its usual stoic mask. Her emotions were a private matter, locked away like her dreams, too vulnerable to be exposed. She couldn't afford such indulgence. Not here, not now. Her focus had to remain on the grind, on the pragmatic realities of making ends meet. The past was a beautiful, painful melody, but it belonged to a life she no longer lived. Or so she told herself, even as the notes of the nocturne seemed to pluck at the very strings of her soul, reminding her of the undeniable, visceral connection she had to the music. Sometimes, after particularly exhausting shifts, Sarah would allow herself a small indulgence. She'd take the subway home, the rhythmic clatter of the train a percussive backdrop to the melodies swirling in her head. Once inside her cramped studio apartment, she'd shed her uniform, pour herself a glass of water, and approach the old grand piano. It wasn't a pristine instrument. Its ivory keys were yellowed with age, a few of them chipped, and the soundboard bore the faint scratches of forgotten battles with dust. But to Sarah, it was priceless. It was her mother's. A gift from her father, purchased with years of painstaking savings. She'd lift the heavy lid, a faint scent of aged wood and memories wafting up. She wouldn't play complex pieces. Sometimes she'd just run her fingers over the keys, a silent exercise, feeling the familiar texture, remembering the weight of each note. Other times, she'd play simple scales, or perhaps a fragment of a lullaby her mother used to sing, the soft, melancholic notes filling the small space. These moments were bittersweet, a painful reminder of what she had lost, but also a lifeline, a connection to the passion that still flickered within her. The very act of touching the keys, feeling the subtle resistance, hearing the resonance, was a quiet rebellion against the silence she had imposed upon herself. Tonight, however, the exhaustion was too profound. She merely touched the keys, a fleeting caress, before turning away. Her mind, despite her weariness, was still racing. She thought of her cousin, confined to his bed, his small body racked with pain. She thought of her aunt and uncle, their faces etched with worry. She thought of the endless cycle of shifts, the meager tips, the ever-present financial strain. Music, beautiful as it was, couldn't pay the bills. It couldn't buy medicine. It couldn't heal. This harsh truth was the iron cage around her heart, keeping the soaring melodies of her past firmly grounded. She went to bed, the ghost of Chopin's Nocturne still echoing in her mind, a beautiful, painful reminder of the life she had traded for responsibility. Tomorrow, however, her carefully constructed quiet world would be violently shaken, and the hidden maestro within her would be irrevocably called upon to face a challenge she never anticipated. The air in the Gilded Spoon on a bustling Friday evening thrummed with a different kind of energy than its usual sophisticated murmur. It was denser, charged with the nervous anticipation of a full house, the orchestrated chaos of a busy kitchen, and the hushed expectations of its affluent clientele. The clinking of silverware was sharper, the chatter of voices a more insistent hum, and the soft jazz from the lounge now competed with the rising crescendo of a demanding evening service. Serafina Dubois navigated this intricate dance with practiced ease, her mind a well-oiled machine of efficiency, but her underlying weariness felt heavier than usual. Tonight her section was particularly demanding, anchored by the imposing presence of Mr. Reginald Sterling at table 10. Sterling, a formidable figure in his early 60s, was a wealthy real estate developer whose physical presence was as imposing as his financial empire. His silver hair was meticulously coiffed, his expensive suit impeccably tailored, and a thick gold signet ring gleamed ostentatiously on his left hand, catching the light with every dismissive gesture. He was a regular at the Gilded Spoon, not because he particularly enjoyed the cuisine, but because it affirmed his status, a stage where he could publicly display his wealth, and more importantly, his perceived superiority. Sterling possessed an almost pathological arrogance, a deep-seated belief that his vast fortune entitled him to treat anyone he deemed beneath him with casual contempt. He often specifically requested Sarah's section, not out of any particular fondness for her service, but because he found a peculiar satisfaction in having a quiet, dignified black woman catering to his every whim, a subtle reinforcement of his own power. He believed it lent an air of old-world charm to his opulent dining experience, a perverse fantasy of deference that he felt was his due. His conversation, when he deigned to speak to Sarah, was usually laced with thinly veiled condescension, delivered with a smug, self-satisfied smirk. "Another bottle of the '98 Bordeaux, girl, and try not to dawdle this time," he'd commanded earlier, his voice carrying just enough to be overheard by his equally ostentatious guests. A collection of sycophants and business associates, all mirroring his self-important aura. Sarah had simply nodded, her expression unreadable, and retrieved the exorbitantly priced bottle with practiced grace. She knew the type. She'd served countless Reginalds over the years, their faces blurring into a single entitled sneer. She had mastered the art of invisibility, a crucial skill for survival in her line of work. To be seen was to invite further scrutiny, further disrespect. So she served. She smiled politely, and she remained a ghost. Watching from the bustling pass behind the gleaming stainless steel of the kitchen was Chef Antoine Dubois, a man in his early 50s, with a neatly trimmed beard and a perpetually flour-dusted chef's jacket. Antoine was the culinary genius behind the Gilded Spoon. He was French, passionate, and utterly devoted to the intricate ballet of his kitchen. He prided himself on efficiency and precision, and while he valued his staff, his focus was almost entirely on the flawless execution of his dishes and the smooth operation of the restaurant. He saw Sarah as an excellent, reliable waitress, quiet, efficient, and never a source of trouble. He appreciated her low profile, her ability to simply do her job without fuss, a stark contrast to some of the more dramatic personalities he'd encountered in the service industry. He respected her work ethic, but remained largely oblivious to the deeper currents of her life, or the subtle indignities she endured daily. To him, she was a cog in the well-oiled machine, and a silent cog was always the best kind. The evening progressed, a dizzying blur of plates, orders, and polite smiles. Sarah moved with the efficiency of long habit, her mind half present, half lost in the silent melodies that always accompanied her. Sterling's table was loud, their laughter punctuated by the clinking of glasses. Sarah felt a familiar knot of apprehension in her stomach. His voice, already slurred from several glasses of expensive wine, grew louder, more boisterous. He was clearly enjoying his power, basking in the deference of his guests, and in his mind, the implicit subservience of his server. Then, it happened. Sarah was leaning in to retrieve an empty bread plate, her arm outstretched, when Sterling, with a deliberate, almost theatrical flourish, swept his hand across the table. A half-full glass of the prized red Bordeaux tumbled over, spilling in a dark crimson wave across the pristine white tablecloth, and, more jarringly, directly onto the polished marble floor, splashing dangerously close to Sarah's freshly polished black shoes. A gasp rippled through his table. Before Sarah could even react, Sterling leaned back, a grotesque smirk stretching his lips. He looked directly at her, his eyes glinting with malicious amusement. "Good heavens, girl. Clumsy, aren't we?" he drawled, his voice carrying, sharp and clear, through the din of the restaurant. His guests snickered, a few exchanging knowing glances. "Well, don't just stand there gawking. Get that mess cleaned up, and be quick about it. My guests find such untidiness terribly unappetizing." He waved his hand dismissively, as if swatting away a fly. Sarah froze. Her jaw tightened, a muscle in her cheek twitching almost imperceptibly. Cleaning spilled wine from the floor was not a waitress's duty. That fell to the busboys or the dedicated cleaning staff. It was a deliberate act of public humiliation, a calculated insult meant to assert his dominance and remind her and everyone else of her perceived place. Her heart hammered against her ribs, a drumbeat of anger and shame. The old instinct, the one that urged her to shrink, to disappear, flared within her. Just clean it, Sarah. Be invisible. Let it pass. But then, Sterling, emboldened by her momentary stillness, delivered the final crushing blow. He chuckled, a low, guttural sound, and leaned conspiratorially towards his guests, but spoke loudly enough for Sarah to hear every word. "Honestly, I wonder if these hands are capable of anything else besides cleaning up messes. Perhaps they're good for polishing shoes? Or, what was it you said, Gerald? Playing with dolls?" His guests laughed, a chorus of shallow, sycophantic mirth that grated on Sarah's ears. "You see, my dear," he continued, now addressing Sarah directly, his tone dripping with fake concern, "some people just aren't cut out for anything more than simple tasks. Best to know your place, wouldn't you agree?" His words, sharp and laced with a casual cruelty, were not just a personal insult. They were a systemic slur, an implied judgment on her intelligence, her capability, her very worth, tied intrinsically to the color of her skin and her station in life. They were a direct assault on the quiet dignity she had fought so hard to maintain. Sarah felt a hot flush creep up her neck, a familiar sting of indignity. She gripped the edge of the table, her knuckles white. The wine stain on the floor seemed to mock her, a crimson stain on her soul. This wasn't just about a spill. This was about something far deeper, something that gnawed at the very core of her being. From the corner of her eye she saw Chef Antoine at the pass, his brow furrowed in a slight frown. He had noticed the incident, but his expression was more of annoyance at the disruption than true outrage at Sterling's behavior. He merely gestured to a busboy, indicating the spill needed to be cleaned. He was pragmatic, focused on the smooth operation of his kitchen, seemingly oblivious to the racial undertones and personal attack. But for Sarah, Sterling's words, his condescending tone, the dismissive laughter of his guests, they ignited a flicker of defiance, a spark in the deepest recesses of her long-suppressed spirit. "Know your place?" The phrase echoed in her mind, mingling with the haunting melodies of her unplayed past. She looked down at her hands, the hands he had just mocked. These hands had mastered complex arpeggios, delivered intricate harmonies, brought forth music that moved souls. These hands were capable of far more than scrubbing floors or carrying plates. A powerful, almost visceral urge rose within her, an unshakable conviction to prove him wrong, not just for herself, but for every unspoken insult, every overlooked talent, every soul dismissed because of superficial judgments. In that moment, standing over the spilled wine, with the laughter of Sterling's guests ringing in her ears, Seraphina Dubois felt something profound shift within her. The quiet resignation, the weary acceptance of her fate, shattered like brittle glass. A cold, hard resolve settled in its place. She suddenly understood, with piercing clarity, that she could no longer remain invisible, no longer retreat into the comforting silence of her own internal world. This wasn't just about cleaning a spill. It was about reclaiming her dignity, about shattering the invisible chains of expectation and prejudice that society had tried to place upon her. The casual racism, the public humiliation, the outright dismissal of her inherent worth. It was a pattern she had endured for too long. This incident, however, was different. It felt like a direct assault on her very essence, a challenge to the soul that cradled forgotten symphonies. She took a slow, deliberate breath, the scent of expensive wine and polished wood filling her nostrils. Her fingers, which moments ago had trembled with indignity, now curled into a determined fist, then relaxed. She met Sterling's smug gaze, her eyes, usually downcast, now blazing with a quiet fire he had never seen. The polite waitress, the invisible ghost, was gone. In her place stood a woman on the precipice of a profound transformation, ready to shatter the expectations of a man who believed wealth granted him the right to define others. This was her point of no return. She would not simply clean the spill. She would not simply serve. She would play. And she would leave him, and everyone else in that opulent room, utterly speechless. The silence that descended upon the Gilded Spoon was not the hushed, respectful quiet of a fine dining establishment. It was a sudden, jarring cessation of all sound, a collective intake of breath from every patron, every busboy, every culinary artist in Chef Antoine's bustling kitchen. The clinking of crystal, the gentle hum of conversation, the distant murmur of the jazz trio, all vanished, replaced by an almost unbearable tension. Reginald Sterling, still smirking over the spilled wine, his eyes glinting with a malicious amusement, waited. He fully expected Sarah Dubois to flinch, to stammer an apology, to scurry away to fetch a cloth. He had played this game countless times, and the outcome was always the same: deference, humiliation, and the reaffirmation of his superior status. Sarah, however, did not move to clean the spill. Her hands, which had trembled moments before with the sting of indignation, now stilled by a sudden cold resolve. She looked down at the crimson stain on the marble, then slowly, deliberately, met Sterling's gaze. Her eyes, usually veiled by a quiet resignation, now blazed with a fierce, unyielding fire he had never seen. The polite waitress, the invisible ghost, had vanished, replaced by a presence that commanded, rather than merely occupied, the space around her. "You speak of hands, Mr. Sterling." Sarah's voice, when it finally emerged, was not loud, but it cut through the oppressive silence with the precision of a surgeon's scalpel. It was calm, measured, utterly devoid of emotion, yet carried an undeniable steel that resonated through the opulent dining room. "You speak of capability, of knowing one's place." She paused, her gaze unwavering, holding his. "My hands, Mr. Sterling, are quite capable of many things beyond wiping up spills or carrying trays." A ripple of murmurs went through Sterling's table. His guests, initially amused, now shifted uncomfortably. Sterling himself, unaccustomed to such defiance from his perceived inferiors, stiffened. His smug expression faltered, replaced by a flicker of confusion, then outright irritation. He gestured dismissively at the spilled wine. "Oh, do they? Fascinating. And pray tell, what else are those hands of yours capable of besides running your mouth, girl? Are they capable of cleaning up this mess, perhaps?" He laughed, a short, derisive bark that echoed unpleasantly in the suddenly quiet room. "I asked you to prove your supposed talent, didn't I? Not to deliver a lecture." He paused. Then his eyes landed on the grand piano in the restaurant's lounge area, a polished black behemoth that usually hosted a professional jazz or classical pianist for evening entertainment. It stood gleaming under a focused spotlight, an elegant centerpiece. A male pianist had just finished his set and was excusing himself for a brief break, leaving the instrument unattended. An idea, cruel and entertaining, sparked in Sterling's wine-addled mind. He straightened, a triumphant, malicious grin spreading across his face. "Ah, yes, the piano," Sterling declared, his voice booming slightly, intended for the entire restaurant to hear. He gestured grandly towards the unoccupied instrument. "Since you're so eager to demonstrate your capabilities, little waitress, how about you show us something truly impressive? Something beyond the mundane. Get up there. Play something for us. Anything at all. Let's see if those capable hands can do more than merely serve. If you impress me, truly impress me, I'll give you a generous tip. A very generous one for your efforts. If not," he leaned forward, his voice dropping to a theatrical whisper, thick with disdain, "then perhaps you'll finally understand where you truly belong." His eyes gleamed with anticipated triumph. He envisioned her fumbling, playing a simple, childish tune, or perhaps even better, refusing outright, confirming his cynical view of her. The humiliation would be exquisite. He chuckled, exchanging a knowing glance with his rapt audience of sycophants, who now smirked in anticipation of Sarah's impending mortification. A hushed collective gasp rippled through the dining room. Chef Antoine Dubois, who had been observing the escalating confrontation from the kitchen pass, felt a knot of dread tighten in his stomach. He admired Sarah's quiet competence, but this was a blatant overreach, a cruel public spectacle. His initial annoyance at the disruption now morphed into genuine concern. He took a step forward, a frustrated sigh escaping his lips, clearly wanting to intervene, but hesitated. Sterling was a powerful, influential patron. Offending him could have serious repercussions for the restaurant. Antoine was a chef, not a social justice warrior. He prided himself on efficiency, on keeping his kitchen running smoothly, not on challenging the social order of his patrons. Sarah, however, seemed oblivious to the growing discomfort, the low murmurs of shock that spread through the dining room. She saw only Sterling, his sneering face, his condescending eyes, challenging her to prove her worth. This wasn't just about the piano. It was about every subtle slight, every whispered judgment, every assumption made about her because of her skin, her quiet demeanor, her job. This was a challenge to her very soul, to the dreams she had buried, to the talent she had locked away. She took a slow, deliberate breath, the clamor of her inner world suddenly silencing. A profound stillness settled over her. She did not look at Sterling. She did not look at Chef Antoine or the other bewildered staff. She did not look at the curious, judgmental faces of the diners. Instead, she fixed her gaze on the piano, its polished surface gleaming invitingly under the lounge's soft light. It was an invitation, a silent call to a part of herself she had long denied. Her past, her training, the years of silent sacrifice, it all coalesced into a singular, undeniable purpose. This was not a request. This was a command, a demand that could no longer be ignored. With unhurried, graceful steps, Serafina Dubois walked towards the grand piano. Each step was a quiet statement, a defiance of Sterling's expectation that she would hesitate, stumble, or cower. Her back was ramrod straight, her head held high. The soft rustle of her apron was the only sound as she approached the instrument, an elegant, almost regal figure moving through the stunned silence. Sterling, still smug, watched her approach. "Oh, this should be rich," he muttered to his guests, stifling another chuckle. "The cleaning girl, a concert pianist. What's next? The busboy conducting the symphony?" His voice was loud enough to be overheard, his intent to mock utterly transparent. He imagined her tentatively touching the keys, perhaps playing a simple elementary tune, bumbling through it before slinking back to her duties, further cementing his perceived victory. Sarah reached the piano. She paused, her hands hovering above the keys, a silent communion with the instrument. Her fingers, which held the faint callus of countless hours of practice, trembled imperceptibly for a moment, then settled. She closed her eyes, shutting out the glaring lights, the expectant faces, the sneering contempt of Reginald Sterling. In that moment, she was not Sarah the waitress. She was Serafina Dubois, the musician, the prodigy, the artist. She felt the familiar texture of the ivory beneath her fingertips, the cool smoothness, the subtle resistance of the springs. The scent of aged wood and felt filled her nostrils, a comforting aroma that transported her back to a lifetime ago, to her mother's side, learning to navigate the vast universe of sound. Then she began to play. Her fingers, no longer hesitant, moved with a sudden, astonishing fluidity, a breathtaking display of virtuosity that seemed impossible for hands that served plates all day. The opening notes, crisp and clear, pierced the silence, a powerful, soaring melody that filled the air. It wasn't a simple tune. It was a complex, emotionally charged classical piece, the Fantaisie Impromptu by Frédéric Chopin, a notoriously difficult and emotionally demanding composition, a whirlwind of arpeggios and intricate harmonies. The first few bars alone were enough to send a jolt through the entire restaurant. Conversations died in mid-sentence. Forks clattered onto plates. Chef Antoine, who had been anxiously watching from the kitchen, froze, a plate of perfectly seared scallops forgotten in his hand. His brow furrowed in disbelief, then slowly, wondrously, cleared. His eyes widened, his jaw slacked, a look of profound astonishment spreading across his face. Reginald Sterling's triumphant smirk dissolved instantly. His mouth, which had been preparing another mocking jest, remained agape, his eyes wide with incredulity. The color drained from his face, leaving him a sickly, pallid white. He stared, utterly speechless, at the woman he had just attempted to humiliate. This was not the bumbling display he had anticipated. This was a performance of extraordinary skill, raw emotion, and undeniable genius. His guests, moments ago complicit in his cruel amusement, now sat transfixed, their own expressions mirroring his shock. Some leaned forward, their eyes wide. Others simply stared at Sarah, unable to reconcile the image of the humble waitress with the virtuoso seated at the piano. Sarah played on, her eyes still closed, her body swaying almost imperceptibly with the music. The Chopin piece flowed from her fingers with an astonishing power, each note imbued with a lifetime of suppressed emotion, the pain of her lost dreams, the quiet dignity of her struggles, the fierce love for her family, and the unyielding hope that had quietly sustained her. The music wasn't just beautiful, it was profound, a narrative told through soaring melodies and crashing chords, a story of struggle and resilience that transcended language. She played with a fierce precision, yet there was a deep, aching pathos in every phrase, a raw, vulnerable beauty that held the entire room captive. The restaurant remained utterly silent, save for the breathtaking cascade of notes filling the air. No one moved, no one spoke. The applause that usually punctuated polite performances was held, suspended in the air, as if a single breath might shatter the fragile magic of the moment. Sterling, still frozen, felt a cold dread creep into his stomach. This wasn't just a waitress playing a piano. This was an artist, a master, publicly exposing his grotesque misjudgment. His petty attempt at humiliation had backfired spectacularly, revealing not her inadequacy, but his own profound ignorance and arrogance. The unveiling was complete, and the person most unveiled, most exposed, was not Sarah, but Reginald Sterling himself. The last lingering note of Chopin's Fantaisie Impromptu hung in the air, shimmering with raw emotion, before slowly, reluctantly, fading into silence. The profound stillness that followed was more potent than any applause. It was the silence of utter astonishment, of collective disbelief. Reginald Sterling, his face ashen, remained frozen, his mouth agape, the intended sneer contorted into a mask of abject shock. His guests, moments ago smirking in anticipation of a humiliating spectacle, now stared at Sarah with wide, reverent eyes, their own expressions mirroring their host's stunned disbelief. Chef Antoine Dubois, still holding the forgotten plate of scallops, his earlier anxiety replaced by a blossoming awe, felt a tremor of tears in his eyes. Then a single clap broke the spell sharp and clear. It came from a young woman at a nearby table, quickly followed by another, and then a ripple that swelled into a thunderous ovation. The Gilded Spoon, a bastion of quiet sophistication, erupted. Patrons, typically reserved, rose to their feet, cheering, whistling, and pounding tables. Waiters and busboys, forgetting their duties, openly applauded, some wiping away tears. Sarah, her eyes still closed for a moment, slowly opened them, blinking at the dazzling spotlight, the overwhelming sound of applause. She saw the admiration, the awe, the respect on faces that had only ever seen her as a humble server. But Reginald Sterling, his initial shock giving way to a seething, incandescent rage, could not tolerate this. His humiliation was absolute, public, and undeniable. His carefully constructed facade of superiority had been shattered, not by a rival, but by a waitress he had intended to belittle. The thought ignited a desperate need to reclaim control, to somehow salvage his wounded pride. He straightened, forcing a sneer back onto his face, though it trembled slightly. All right, enough of this!" Sterling's voice, though loud, seemed to crack under the strain of his fury. He clapped his hands together, a sharp, jarring sound, trying to cut through the applause. "One piece! You played one piece! Impressive, I'll grant you, for a girl who cleans up after me. But one piece does not a concert pianist make." His eyes narrowed, glinting with a renewed, insidious malice. "That was probably your one-party trick, wasn't it? The single piece you rehearsed endlessly, just in case some wealthy patron decided to be charitable." He laughed, a strained, forced sound, trying to inject his usual scorn back into his voice. "Don't tell me that's all you've got. True artists, real musicians can play anything. They can improvise, they can play the masterpieces." He paused, scanning the room, his gaze landing back on Sarah at the piano. A new, more insidious challenge formed in his mind, a final, desperate attempt to break her, to prove that her talent was a fluke, a limited skill. "Let's see if you can truly impress me then, maestro," he sneered, dragging out the mock title. "The Fantasy Impromptu is merely a warm-up. Let's see you play Rhapsody in Blue by George Gershwin." A collective gasp went through the audience, quickly followed by whispers of awe and apprehension. Rhapsody in Blue was not just a difficult piece. It was a behemoth, a symphonic jazz masterpiece requiring not only immense technical skill, but also a profound understanding of its intricate emotional landscape and improvisational flair. It was a test of raw virtuosity and musical soul, a piece rarely attempted by anyone outside of seasoned concert pianists. It would take weeks, even months of dedicated practice to master, let alone play on the spot. Sterling, seeing the shift in the crowd's reaction, felt a surge of dark satisfaction. He knew this would push her. He pulled out his expensive gold-plated smartphone, its screen gleaming. "And to prove this isn't just some prepared act," he continued, his voice dripping with condescension, "I'm setting a timer. You have 10 minutes. If you can't play the entire piece, note for note, within that time, you lose. You admit you're nothing but a waitress, and you accept your place. And," he added, a cruel afterthought, "I expect my table to be spotless when you're done, personally cleaned by your capable hands. No busboy." He deliberately ignored the outraged murmurs from the crowd, his focus solely on Sarah. "Think of it as a final lesson, girl. Some things are just beyond your reach." His words hung in the air, a gauntlet thrown down, challenging her not just as a pianist, but as a person. The applause had died down, replaced by a tense, nervous silence. The spotlight on the piano seemed to intensify, making Sarah feel utterly exposed, vulnerable. This was the ultimate test. She looked at the grand piano, its polished surface reflecting the worried faces of Chef Antoine and her colleagues, the furious glares of some patrons, and the smug, expectant sneer of Reginald Sterling. The weight of his challenge settled on her shoulders, heavy and suffocating. This was not just a performance for a generous tip. This was about reclaiming her identity, her dignity, in the face of relentless prejudice. This was about honoring the memory of her mother, who had instilled in her the belief that music was soul, not just notes. The clock on Sterling's phone began to tick down, each second amplified by the sudden, oppressive quiet. Sarah felt a tremor of fear, a familiar ghost of self-doubt. Rhapsody in Blue, in 10 minutes? It's impossible. He's trying to break you. She remembered her mother's words, whispered lovingly during their endless practice sessions. Music isn't just about the notes, Serafina. It's about the feeling, the story you tell. Let your heart lead. She closed her eyes again, shutting out the physical world, retreating into the sanctuary of her own mind. She could hear the bustling sounds from the kitchen, the low murmur of Chef Antoine giving urgent, hushed commands to his staff, as if trying to reassert some semblance of normalcy to distract from the unbearable tension. The restaurant manager, a tall, impeccably dressed man named Mr. Davies, stood stiffly by the entrance, his face a mask of profound discomfort, clearly wishing he were anywhere else. The entire scene felt surreal, suspended in time, an arena where one woman's long-buried talent was being put to the most public, most brutal of tests. Sarah's hands, resting on the cool ivory keys, felt a profound connection to the instrument, a silent conversation between artist and creation. She remembered the sheer joy of playing, the way music allowed her to express emotions she couldn't put into words. She remembered the long, solitary hours of practice, the blisters, the aching fingers, the relentless pursuit of perfection. This instrument was a part of her, an extension of her soul. She took a deep, centering breath, and a fierce resolve hardened her jaw. She would not just play. She would transcend. She would make him, and everyone else, understand. She would make them feel. Reginald Sterling leaned back in his chair, a smug smile spreading across his face, his eyes fixed on the ticking clock. He had won. He was sure of it. This was an impossible task. The little waitress would fail, crumble under the pressure, and slink back to her station, her fleeting moment of glory extinguished. He envisioned the moment she faltered, the inevitable look of defeat on her face. That would be his true victory. He had reduced countless ambitious individuals, less powerful than he, to tears or resignation. Sarah Dubois would be no different. He watched her, waiting for the first sign of weakness, for the tremor in her hands, the doubt in her eyes. But what he saw was only a profound stillness, a gathering of focus that seemed to pull all the ambient energy of the room into her. The quiet before the storm. And this storm would not be a mere drizzle. It would be a hurricane. The ticking of Reginald Sterling's timer on his phone was a merciless, amplified heartbeat in the suffocating silence of The Gilded Spoon. 10 minutes. 10 minutes to perform a monumental piece of music, a composition that demanded technical brilliance, emotional depth, and improvisational genius. Sarah's heart hammered against her ribs, a frantic rhythm that threatened to drown out all other thoughts. She heard Sterling's strained, mocking laughter, the nervous shuffling of feet from the diners, the almost imperceptible click as Chef Antoine silently moved closer to the pass, his worry now palpable. The pressure was a physical weight, pressing down on her, threatening to crush her. She closed her eyes, shutting out the glaring spotlight, the expectant faces, the sneering contempt of Reginald Sterling. In that profound darkness, memories flooded her mind, a kaleidoscope of images and sounds. Her mother's gentle touch guiding her small fingers across the keys, the scent of aged paper from her sheet music, the comforting rhythm of their shared practice. She remembered the sheer joy of losing herself in a melody, the way the music transcended her meager surroundings, transforming their tiny living room into a grand concert hall. But then other memories intruded. The sterile hospital room, the whispered prognosis, the crushing weight of medical bills, the heartbreaking decision to abandon her scholarship, to leave her dreams behind for the stark realities of survival. The grief, the resentment, the quiet desperation, all of it surged within her, a tempest of conflicting emotions. "This is it, Sarah," a voice whispered in her mind. "This is where you fail. He's right. You're just a waitress. Your hands are for serving, not for soaring." But then, another voice, clear and strong, resonated from the depths of her memory. Her mother's voice, loving and firm. "Music isn't just about the notes, Serafina. It's about the feeling, the story you tell. Let your heart lead, always. Even when your fingers falter, your soul will guide them." Sarah took a deep, shuddering breath, filling her lungs with the scent of possibility. When her eyes opened, they no longer held fear or resignation, but a blazing, indomitable resolve. She was not playing for Sterling's approval. She was playing for her mother, for Darius, for every silenced voice, every overlooked talent. She was playing to reclaim herself. Her fingers, which had briefly trembled, now settled onto the keys with an almost fierce determination. She launched into the opening chords of Rhapsody in Blue. The first notes were a dramatic, soaring glissando, a cascade of sound that filled the room, demanding attention. Then came the iconic clarinet wail, perfectly rendered on the piano, a melancholic cry that morphed into a jaunty, syncopated melody. Her playing was not just technically brilliant, it was infused with a raw, almost visceral emotion. Each note was a brushstroke, painting a vivid picture of the bustling city, of dreams and despair, of rhythm and blues. Her body swayed slightly with the music, her eyes occasionally fluttering closed as she channeled every fiber of her being into the performance. The complexity of Gershwin's masterpiece unfolded beneath her hands. Her left hand laid down a powerful driving bass line, a jazz rhythm that pulsed with life, while her right hand danced across the keys, delivering the soaring, intricate melodies with astonishing clarity and precision. The music was a narrative, a journey through joy and sorrow, chaos and harmony. She moved seamlessly between the jazzy improvisations and the grand orchestral sweeps, her interpretation infused with a depth of feeling that transcended mere performance. A collective hush had fallen over the Gilded Spoon. Patrons leaned forward, their faces a mixture of awe and disbelief. Waiters paused in mid-stride, trays forgotten. Chef Antoine, still at the pass, was no longer just watching. He was feeling the music, his eyes wide, a silent tear tracing a path through the flour dust on his cheek. Even Reginald Sterling, initially seething, felt an uncomfortable shift within him. The music was too powerful to ignore, too compelling to dismiss. It was reaching something deep inside him, something he hadn't known existed. His smug expression had slowly, almost imperceptibly, begun to crack. Then came the notorious stride piano section, a dizzying flurry of notes, fast and intricate, requiring immense dexterity. Sarah's fingers flew across the keys, a blur of motion, her brow furrowed in concentration. She hit every note, every chord, with breathtaking accuracy. But then, for a split second, a moment that stretched into an eternity, her right hand faltered. A single, almost imperceptible missed note. It was barely noticeable to an untrained ear, but to anyone with musical knowledge, it was there. A cruel, knowing smile began to spread on Sterling's face. Ah, there it is, the crack in the facade. He leaned forward, preparing to announce her failure, to revel in her defeat. He started to open his mouth, a triumphant sneer already forming, but Sarah, in that microsecond of perceived error, didn't flinch. Her mother's voice echoed, "Let your heart lead." She didn't hesitate. She didn't stop. Instead, with a flash of improvisational brilliance born from years of deeply ingrained musicality and sheer, desperate will, she wove the missed note into a small, unexpected arpeggio, a brief, exquisite flourish that sounded not like a mistake, but like a deliberate, breathtaking embellishment. It was a testament to her mastery, a phoenix rising from the ashes of almost failure. It was a silent, defiant roar. The music swelled, then transitioned into the grand romantic theme, the powerful, sweeping melody that was the heart of Rhapsody in Blue. Sarah played it with a profound, almost heartbreaking beauty. Her hands seemed to become one with the piano, pulling forth every ounce of emotion from the instrument, every nuance, every aching, hopeful crescendo. It was a story told without words, a raw outpouring of a soul that had endured, persevered, and finally, irrevocably, soared. Reginald Sterling, who had been poised to gloat, slowly, mechanically, lowered his head. The triumph had vanished from his face, replaced by a look of utter, profound defeat. He wasn't just silent, he was speechless, his usual bluster completely deflated. The music had pierced his armor of arrogance, revealing the hollow, pathetic man beneath. His guests, who had initially been amused by his cruelty, now looked at him with open disgust. They had witnessed not a performance, but a revelation. a public stripping away of pretense. The entire restaurant was a single collective entity hanging on every note. When Sarah delivered the final, magnificent, triumphant chords of Rhapsody in Blue, the sound exploded through the room, a dazzling, powerful climax that resonated deep in the chest. For a beat, a collective held breath. Then the entire Gilded Spoon erupted. The applause was deafening, a roaring wave that crashed over Sarah, shaking the very foundations of the restaurant. Patrons rose to their feet en masse, not just clapping but cheering, shouting, whistling, their faces contorted with emotion, tears streaming down some cheeks, wide, incredulous smiles on others. They stamped their feet, pounded on tables, their voices a triumphant roar. Chef Antoine Dubois, tears openly streaming now, slammed his hands together with such force that his staff, startled, turned to stare at him. He was a Frenchman, expressive and passionate, and his face was a portrait of unadulterated awe and pride. He joined the applause, his booming voice yelling, "Bravo! Magnifique! Bravo, Sarah!" His entire kitchen staff leaned out, clapping furiously, sharing in the collective euphoria. The change in the faces of the crowd was palpable. From initial skepticism to curious amusement, then to dawning wonder, profound astonishment, and finally, utter, unreserved awe and admiration. They weren't just applauding a good performance. They were acknowledging a miracle, a triumph of the human spirit over adversity. They had witnessed a profound act of defiance, a quiet individual asserting her worth in the most magnificent way possible. The triumph wasn't just Sarah's, it was theirs too, a shared catharsis against the casual cruelties of the world. Reginald Sterling remained seated, utterly crushed, his face pale and clammy. He watched, stunned, as his own guests, the very people he sought to impress, joined the thunderous ovation, some even turning to cast him looks of utter disdain. His power, his carefully constructed illusion of superiority, had been irrevocably shattered, not by a rival, but by the very person he had tried to humiliate. He had tried to break her, but she had soared, and in doing so, had broken him. The time on his phone, stubbornly stuck on Urero 1 after she had hit the final chord, felt like an eternity of his own self-inflicted failure. He had not just lost a bet. He had lost his dignity, exposed his true pathetic nature for all to see. The victory was complete. The thunderous applause eventually subsided, leaving an electric hum in its wake, a collective energy that vibrated through the Gilded Spoon. Patrons slowly returned to their seats, but their conversations were subdued, their gazes still fixed on Sarah. The silence was no longer tense but imbued with a newfound reverence, a profound respect for the woman who had just delivered an unforgettable performance, and in doing so, shattered every preconceived notion about her. Reginald Sterling, however, remained a picture of utter defeat. The color had completely drained from his face, leaving it a sickly, mottled gray. His earlier smugness was replaced by a vacant stare, his lips still slightly parted in a silent, pathetic gasp. He looked utterly humiliated, a caricature of his former arrogant self. His own guests, those sycophants who had earlier laughed at his crude jokes, now pointedly ignored him, some even whispering amongst themselves, their expressions a mixture of embarrassment and thinly veiled disgust at his earlier behavior. He tried to muster his usual bluster, to find a cutting remark, but no words came. The music had stripped him bare, exposing his pettiness and cruelty for all to see. He felt the weight of every judging stare, every hushed whisper, 1,000 tiny needles pricking his fragile ego. With a choked sound, a desperate, pathetic whimper, he pushed his chair back with a loud scrape, startling those nearby, and stumbled out of the restaurant, a disgraced, shrunken figure fleeing the scene of his own public undoing. He left no tip, but his exit was a far greater admission of defeat than any monetary offering could have been. The news of his egregious behavior and Sarah's astonishing talent would, inevitably, spread like wildfire through the city's elite circles, his reputation irrevocably tarnished. His humiliation was absolute, his self-inflicted downfall complete. Chef Antoine Dubois, however, was a transformed man. His usual stern, focused demeanor had melted away, replaced by an expression of profound awe and, more importantly, deep regret. He rushed from the kitchen pass, pushing through the lingering staff, and approached Sarah at the piano, his eyes still shining with unshed tears. He stopped before her, his hands clasped in front of him, his posture conveying a humble sincerity. "Serafina," he began, his voice thick with emotion, his French accent more pronounced than usual. "My dear, I am without words. What I have just witnessed, it is a miracle. It is pure genius." He took a deep breath, his gaze unwavering. "And I am ashamed. Ashamed that I did not see it before. Ashamed that I allowed a man like Sterling to speak to you, to treat you, with such disrespect. You are not merely a waitress, Serafina. You are an artist. A true artist. And this restaurant is honored to have you." He paused, then continued, his voice ringing with renewed conviction, loud enough for many of the remaining patrons and staff to hear. "I want to apologize, publicly, for my own short-sightedness, for being so focused on the mundane operations that I failed to see the extraordinary talent in my own staff. You deserve so much more." He then straightened, his eyes gleaming with a newfound resolve. "Serafina, I have a proposition for you. This is not just an apology, it is a commitment. Effective immediately, I want you to be our resident pianist. Every evening during dinner service, you will play for our guests. Not only that, but your wage will reflect your artistry. It will be a salary worthy of a concert pianist, not a waitress. And your shifts as a waitress will be drastically reduced, enough only to ensure you remain part of our team if you wish. This is your stage now, Serafina. This is your home. And if you ever wish to pursue your dreams beyond these walls, I will be your greatest advocate. I will help you find the contacts, the teachers, the opportunities you need. Consider it my penance and my profound honor." A wave of appreciative murmurs swept through the room, followed by another burst of genuine applause, this time specifically for Chef Antoine's heartfelt gesture. Sarah looked at Chef Antoine, her heart swelling with an emotion she hadn't felt in years. Hope. This wasn't just a job offer, it was a lifeline, a validation, a second chance at a life she thought she had lost forever. The financial stability would allow her to continue supporting her cousin, alleviating a massive burden. But more than that, it was the opportunity to play again, to live and breathe music, to finally unshackle the melodies that had been trapped within her soul for so long. "Chef Antoine," Sarah replied, her voice soft but clear, brimming with gratitude. A genuine, radiant smile touched her lips, a smile that transformed her face, making her eyes sparkle with an inner light that had long been dimmed. "Thank you. Truly. This means everything." She extended a hand, and Antoine, with a rare, broad smile, warmly clasped it. Later that evening, after the last of the awestruck patrons had departed and the restaurant was finally quiet, Sarah and Chef Antoine sat together at a small, intimate table in the corner, sharing a pot of herbal tea. The restaurant was clean, the piano silent, but the echoes of Sarah's music still lingered in the air. "I still cannot believe it, Serafina," Antoine began, shaking his head slowly, a look of wonder on his face. "Such talent, hidden behind a uniform. Why? Why did you not tell me?" His voice was gentle, filled with a genuine curiosity rather than accusation. Sarah sighed, the familiar weariness briefly returning to her eyes, though now it was tinged with relief. "Life, Chef. Life intervened. My mother. She was the reason I played. She taught me everything. When she became ill and then passed, the medical bills, the family to support, I had to make a choice. Music felt like a luxury I couldn't afford. It was too painful, too." Her voice trailed off, a catch in her throat. "I put it away. For years I just served. It was a practical solution. I thought that part of my life was over. The only reason I still have a piano is because it was hers, and I couldn't bear to part with it." Antoine listened, his expression softening with understanding. "Ah, the cruelties of life. But even so, to keep such a gift buried, it must have been agony." He paused, stirring his tea. "When Sterling began his cruel little game, I worried, of course. For the restaurant, yes, but for you too. He is a truly unpleasant man. I had no idea what you would do. But then you played, and it was as if the soul of this place, the very spirit of creation, awoke. It was magnificent. You showed him, Serafina. You showed us all. And you saved us in a way. His behavior would have ruined our reputation. Slowly, surely. Your music, it washed it clean. Sarah offered a small, shy smile. I couldn't let him win. Not like that. Not when he tried to strip away my dignity and the dignity of everyone like me who works hard and just wants to be respected. Something in me just snapped. It was unavoidable. Antoine nodded, a profound understanding passing between them. Unavoidable, he echoed softly. Yes, sometimes. True genius, true spirit, must break free, no matter the chains that bind it. I am truly honored, Serafina, to be a part of your journey now. From this day forward, the Gilded Spoon will be your stage, your sanctuary, your launching pad. He raised his teacup in a silent toast. To Serafina, the maestro. Sarah raised her own cup, the steam curling warmly around her face. A sense of deep peace settled over her, a calm she hadn't felt in years. The future, for the first time in a very long time, felt not like a burden, but like an exhilarating, vibrant melody waiting to be composed. 7 years later, the very fabric of the classical music world, particularly within the hallowed halls of grand concert venues and prestigious academies, hummed with a different, more harmonious energy. The pervasive atmosphere of dismissive prejudice and systemic complacency that had once subtly permeated elite artistic circles had largely dissipated, replaced by a tangible sense of improved professionalism, genuine respect, and equitable treatment for artists from all walks of life. It was a transformation directly attributable to the quiet, yet profound influence of Dr. Serafina Sarah Dubois. The echoes of Reginald Sterling's sneering contempt and the initial defensive backlash from cynical critics had long faded, replaced by widespread recognition of Sarah's unyielding integrity and her strategic foresight, delivered not through corporate power, but through the undeniable universal language of music. Serafina Dubois, now universally revered not just for her breathtaking talent, but for her unshakable moral compass, had become one of the most influential and respected figures in the international classical music scene, and indeed, a global thought leader in arts advocacy. The specialized Thorn Foundation for Justice and Opportunity, which she spearheaded, had flourished beyond all expectations, becoming a benchmark for proactive mentorship, ethics, and best practices within the often exclusive world of performing arts. Her unique blend of artistic genius and deep personal understanding of adversity, forged during her challenging years, proved to be an unstoppable force against artistic elitism, systemic discrimination, and even subtle forms of corporate negligence within the entertainment industry. Under her relentless guidance, the foundation had dismantled several intricate, multi-layered barriers for aspiring artists, exposed pervasive patterns of bias across multiple major conservatories, and, most importantly, implemented industry-wide policy changes that recovered billions in illicit gains from exploitative contracts, while significantly enhancing artist welfare, creative freedom, and equitable access to opportunities. She no longer needed to publicly display her platinum identification card as a tool for confrontation. Its power was woven into the very fabric of her reputation, her every action, and the transformed institutions she had helped reshape. Her initial moniker, the Quiet Innovator, had been almost entirely forgotten by the broader public, superseded by a more resonant title. Now, whispers in the highest echelons of government, from federal agencies in Washington, D.C., to local precincts across the sprawling nation, referred to her with deep respect as the architect of artistic justice, acknowledging her profound and lasting impact on systemic change within the intricate, often insular world of creative expression. She still maintained her disciplined routine, rising before dawn for her rigorous Krav Maga sessions, her mind as sharp and agile as her body. This consistent self-mastery was not merely about personal well-being. It was about ensuring she remained at peak performance to champion a cause far greater than herself. Her work was a testament to the belief that true progress wasn't just about catching individual wrongdoers, but about dismantling the flawed systems that enabled them, ensuring justice wasn't just served, but permanently built into the very foundations of the American justice system, and now the global arts community. Emily Chen, the young defense attorney who had initially represented Darius Jones in the previous chapter of Eris's story, found her own path profoundly influenced by Sarah's public triumph. Though their stories unfolded in parallel universes of the story, the underlying theme of justice and vindication resonated deeply. Inspired directly by Sarah's courage and unwavering stand, Emily had ascended rapidly within the prosecution ranks. She was now a prominent federal prosecutor, specializing in civil rights and corporate accountability, renowned for her meticulous preparation and unshakable ethical stance. Emily had become a mentor herself, actively seeking out and nurturing young lawyers, particularly women and minorities, instilling in them the same principles of integrity, resilience, and fierce dedication to justice that Eris Thorne had so powerfully embodied in her own story. Emily often found herself working alongside Eris's growing initiatives, becoming a crucial ally in the ongoing fight for systemic change, a testament to the ripple effect of one person's courage. As for Reginald Sterling, his reign of petty tyranny and prejudice was a distant, bitter memory. His public humiliation at the Gilded Spoon was merely the first crack in his meticulously crafted facade. The subsequent public outcry and the revelations of his past unethical business practices, spurred by the media attention from the incident, led to a cascade of failed investments, lawsuits, and ultimately bankruptcy. His ostentatious properties were seized, his once inflated network of sycophants abandoned him, and he vanished from the public eye, a cautionary tale whispered in boardrooms about the dangers of unchecked arrogance and the price of public cruelty. He became an obscure, pathetic figure, a mere footnote in the triumphant narrative of Serafina Dubois. Sarah's profound impact extended far beyond the immediate outcomes of her performances and her foundation's initiatives. Driven by a deep-seated desire to ensure that talent and integrity were never again overlooked or stifled due to prejudice, she personally established the Melody of Hope Scholarship Fund. This national program provided comprehensive scholarships, intensive mentorship, and practical training for aspiring musicians from underserved communities, actively encouraging them to pursue challenging careers within the world's most prestigious conservatories and orchestras. She frequently delivered keynote addresses at prestigious legal conferences, law enforcement summits, and university commencements, sharing her own story not as a tale of personal triumph, but as a compelling call to action for systemic change and a powerful reminder that every single individual had the power to contribute to a more just world. Her speeches resonated deeply, inspiring millions and fostering a new generation to champion justice with both sharp intellect and unwavering moral courage. On a crisp autumn afternoon, precisely 7 years to the day after the infamous courtroom incident, Sarah found herself standing on the grand stage of Carnegie Hall, the very pinnacle of classical music venues, bathed in the soft glow of the spotlights. The hall was packed to capacity, a sea of expectant faces stretching into the vast, hushed darkness. She wore a stunning, custom-designed gown, and her hair, once simply braided for practicality, was styled elegantly, framing a face that now radiated confidence and serenity. She was no longer the quiet waitress, but a celebrated virtuoso, a cultural icon. As the conductor bowed and the orchestra settled, Sarah approached the gleaming black concert grand piano. She ran her fingers lightly over the keys, feeling the familiar, reassuring texture. The air thrummed with anticipation. Her concert program featured a new, groundbreaking original composition, a concerto she had penned herself, titled The Serafina Symphony. It was a piece that wove together classical complexity with the improvisational spirit of jazz, drawing inspiration from her own life journey, the struggle, the defiance, the quiet hope, and the ultimate triumph. Before she began, she paused, taking a slow, deep breath. She looked out at the sea of faces, a profound sense of gratitude washing over her. She saw Chef Antoine Dubois, now a revered figure in the culinary world, beaming proudly from the front row. He had not only fulfilled his promise to be her greatest advocate, but had become a lifelong friend and a board member of her foundation. She saw her cousin, now a healthy, thriving young man, an aspiring musician himself, his eyes shining with admiration. She saw a scattering of other familiar faces, former colleagues from the Gilded Spoon, critics who had once doubted her, now ardent admirers. And then, her gaze drifted to a single empty seat in the front row, bathed in a soft, ethereal light. It was where her mother would have sat. A gentle, knowing smile touched Sarah's lips. She felt her mother's presence, not as a haunting memory, but as a guiding spirit, a quiet melody playing in her heart. She turned back to the piano, her hands poised. The moment had arrived. This wasn't just a performance, it was a testament to resilience, to the power of art, and to the indomitable spirit of a woman who refused to let prejudice define her. Her journey, born from humiliation, had blossomed into a symphony of hope, echoing across stages and touching lives across the globe. She began to play. The first notes of the Serafina Symphony swelled through the hall, a powerful, soaring melody that spoke not of past pain, but of future possibilities, of the quiet strength found in every human heart, waiting to be unleashed. It was a beautiful, triumphant song, a testament to courage, talent, and the enduring harmony of justice. The music enveloped the audience, carrying them on a wave of pure emotion, a profound and inspiring message of what happens when one woman, armed with nothing but her undeniable talent and an unbreakable spirit, decides to reclaim her voice, her dignity, and her place in the world. The catharsis was complete, the vindication absolute, and the melody of hope would resonate for generations to come. If this story stirred your heart, if it reminds you that courage can alter destinies, and that light always finds a path even in the deepest darkness, please leave a comment. Share this story with those who need inspiration. Like, subscribe, and hit the bell to never miss our upcoming stories.